Dave, first of all, you've met with the new manager, Pedro Caixinha, this week. What have your first impressions been of him?
I really enjoyed it. You know, I had a kind of sense, because obviously Stuart and the subcommittee that was looking to review the manager gave me some feedback on the interviews with him and how impressive he'd been, both on a personal basis, both in terms of his vision as well around his, I guess what you now call a football philosophy. So it was nice that it pretty much stacked up with my impression. I really enjoyed it. He was good fun, and it was a lovely evening.
In terms of support from the board and from yourself, has he asked for anything specific?
He hasn't yet, but I think that his understanding from the discussions with Stuart, of course, when they were going through the interview process, was that he needed to understand what the position was regarding net investment, and they indicated to him, and I confirmed it again last night, that clearly we will have to continue to invest in the squad. It's something we're anticipating doing. And what Pedro's now got to come in and do between now and the end of the season is look at what he's got within the squad, see how comfortable he is, and kind of put his own player plan together, because we're encouraging him to try and do any business sooner rather than later, because we're all very, very sensitive to the fact that Europa League qualifiers are coming up very early in June. And ideally we would like, if it is possible at all, to have some of the player plan changes in place before we go into these qualifiers.
So he will have resource available to him to bring players in?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And looking further ahead, does he have to offload any of the current playing squad in order to bring new faces in?
I think, he does in the normal course, because you're not just going to add players and just have a squad of players who are not playing. So I think part of his job now is to look at what he wants, what he thinks he's got. Look at some of the players who he thinks might do better away. It could be loan arrangements, it could be moving on to other clubs, and decide who he wants to bring in. So it's probably kind of the most important job that he's got to do over the next couple of weeks, other than obviously getting the team to perform in the park when they've got any games.
Has he intimated how many players he's likely to need come the summer?
No, he hasn't. I think that he's taking what I think is a very sensible approach. He's going to look at what he's got. I think he's been there. He's really had a very limited exposure to the players. He's now got a chance with the break coming up to spend a lot more time with them. So I think it is important that we give him and his support team time to do a proper analysis. And he's obviously got to marry the resources he's got to perhaps a slightly different style of play. I think it's clear from the chat with him that he's probably going to be more, dynamic in terms of his playing options, and he's got to look at what players he thinks fit into that style of play as well. So he's got, quite a bit of work to do over the next couple of weeks before, in his own mind, he's in a position to approach the club and say, these are the type of changes I'd like to make to the squad.
What have you and the board learned from the signing policy of the summer transfer window last year?
Honestly, really probably not a lot, because if you go back from a policy point of view, I think the only departure from the policy was when Mark probably brought in some more senior players, probably some more senior, more expensive players that were probably slightly different from what we had spoken to him about and what he'd initially put to the club. So that was a departure with kind of Warburton signings and some of the later signings as well. But it could have worked out okay, so it's kind of difficult to say, because it didn't work out, that in itself that was a mistake. But certainly I'd like to see us go back to the idea of, if we're going to be spending big money on players, try and get younger players who we can bring in who can do well for the club and hopefully create value as well at a later stage, rather than getting people at a more mature phase of the playing career who we know would have no value to the club beyond the initial couple of years.
Do you expect to have a director of football in place to help you with those transfers come the summer?
Yes, I think there's not as much rush now. I think initially when we were looking at the changes, the director of football, we'd ideally like to have that done before the manager. But now that we've got the manager in place, and now that he's kind of working through that player plan, in any event, there's less pressure on an immediate appointment for the director of football. So similar to the manager position, I think where we did take our time. I think one of the mandates given to Stuart was, let's look carefully, let's not make a rush appointment, look at what's available out there. If we do think there is a possibility of making a permanent appointment, let's do that. If we don't feel that the right candidate's there, let's make the interim appointment, but let's not do that without doing the proper research. And we're the same with the director of football. We want to make sure we get the right person. So certainly not going to be rushed.
On top of that, how important will Pedro Caixinha's contact book be in terms of recruitment?
I think it will be. I think he has quite a wide network of contacts, but he also knows best the type of player that he wants to bring in. So I would imagine, as with any manager, you're going to find the initial impetus will be through players where he's already fairly comfortable. He's probably got players in his mind already who he knows, maybe he's worked with before, who he feels that he'd like to bring into the club. So when he gets to that point of assessing the squad, I'd be very surprised if he didn't use his existing network in terms of at least some of the contacts for the players coming in.
The departure of Mark Warburton, how do you reflect on that, and will the club look to seek compensation?
Yeah, I think that was disappointing. I think that, you know, if Mark and that felt at that point in time that Rangers wasn't their future, I think it was better to sit down and have a discussion with us, and that could have been managed, I think, in a slightly different way. And certainly I'm very, very disappointed that when I was initially approached regarding the possibility of Mark and that moving to Notts Forest, I was approached on the basis was, if they went there, would we waive the compensation? And my response was, we would not waive the compensation because it was a contractual requirement. And I was very, very concerned that if the management team left and we then had to replace them with another management team, we in fact would have to pay compensation. And I didn't want Rangers to be in the wrong side of having to pay and not getting any compensation. And of course that's exactly what happened. Mark and I have now ended up at Notts Forest. We haven't received any compensation, and we in turn had to pay compensation to Qatar to get our manager in place. So we're exactly what I didn't want us to be.
How is the search progressing for the new manager's local assistant?
I'm not involved in that. I think that's something, my understanding is there's a number of interviews that he's looking at. He's had some over the last couple of days. I think he still gets some more to make, but it's a decision that he's going to make according to his own requirements after discussion with Stuart and Andrew. So it's not something that I would personally be involved with. Have
you set the new manager any targets in terms of where you would like to reach in terms of European competition and domestic competition next season?
Yeah, I haven't, in the sense that to a large extent it wasn't even necessary, because when I was chatting to him last night, you know, his own targets and what he told me he sees, you know, him taking the club is pretty much in line, I think, with what we think we should be doing, which is, you know, despite the disappointment of this season in the sense that we haven't performed as well on the pitch as any of us expected, given the resources we've put into the squad, the view still hasn't changed that we've got to get into Europe, which I still think we will do for next year, so that hasn't changed. We've got to increase the squad again to compete in Europe and effectively start competing for the Championship. So the mandate is the same, albeit this year I'm very, very disappointed that we didn't make a better fist of it in terms of competing with Celtic. You know, I would have expected Rangers to be worst case midway, say between, you know, Aberdeen, Hearts and Celtic, and to find ourselves, you know, in the current position we are on the table, I think is extremely disappointing given the investment and resources that we made available to the manager.
In the interim period, Graeme Murty came in as caretaker manager. What can you say about the job that he did in that spell?
It was fantastic. I think that he was able to galvanise the players. I think he got a lot of support. I think if one just looks at, you know, the reception he got from the supporters, I think they were very, very appreciative, I think, of an individual who came in at short notice into a very, very difficult circumstance, had to elevate himself into a position that he did no practical experience of before, and did it for the love of the club, and did, I think, a fantastic job. And I think that's been highlighted with the fact that the supporters, I think, have been very, very appreciative, and they've shown that support to him. So that was really fantastic.
You stressed before how important the academy will be going forward and how impressed you are by the job that's being done by Craig Mulholland. Will there be any change of policy there with the new manager coming in?
No, my understanding is that Pedro has had an initial look at it. I think he likes what he sees. He likes the consistency of, if we want to call it, football philosophy. I think he'll bring his own dimension to it. But I think, you know, if we give credit to, you know, to Mark and Davy and the team and the way they work with the academy, I think it is a legacy. I think that, you know, from Mark's point of view as well, and I think Craig would accept this, I think there's a big contribution. So I think one of the things that Mark has done very well for us, I think, is having that contribution to consistency from the academy level through to the first team. And now we'll get Pedro's extra kind of twist on that, where he will add his own flavour to it. But certainly from an academy point of view, and given that I've been involved with Rangers right back to the creation of Auchenhowie in that training ground, I think it's the most exciting position that we've got from an academy point of view in terms of players, in terms of structure, and in terms of the right human resources going forward. So I'm kind of more confident about that than I've been in my almost 20 years of involvement with the football club.
Given the results of recent weeks and your meeting with Pedro, how confident are you that this campaign can end on a high?
I think it will end in a high. The feedback I'm getting from within the club is that the reaction of the players has been very, very good to the new manager, to the changes in the training regime. And I think the intensity's improved. I think there's far more flexibility. I think the players are enjoying it. I mean, they are all athletes. When athletes like to train, they like to be pushed. So I'm getting a sense that we might get more out of the players than we've had. And I would like to think we'll have a really good go. It's still trying to get second place. There's a couple of big games coming up. But it's looking, it's early days yet, but I can see a strong finish to the season.
There's been a lot of noise level around your non-attendance of games here at Ibrox and away. How would you respond to that? I've actually discussed this a number of times, and my view on that is actually still really hasn't changed. At the time that I get involved with the club, I always recognised it wasn't ideal to have an absentee chairman. It doesn't affect the running of the club. It doesn't affect the operation of the football board because they operate independently in any event. But the real negative, I think, is that in hospitality, it would be normal for the chairman of the club to be at home games, and I'm not there. So in an ideal situation, do I think it would be better for me to be there? Yes. But in terms of the workload, in terms of what I do, in terms of dealing with emails and the issues and the litigation and all the things that I'm personally involved in, the board issues, coming to board meetings, whether I was living in Edinburgh, living in Castlemilk or living in Johannesburg would absolutely make no difference whatsoever. There's comments about why I met Pedro so late. The fact is, if I was at Ibrox, it would still have been a subcommittee who we would have appointed to do that work. It's the right way it should be done. The chairman should not be involved in selection and giving a mandate to those who are mandated to run the football club. We have an operating board. The operating board is expected to do their job within the budgets and the structures around them, and that is how it would work. And whether I'm in Johannesburg or not would make absolutely no difference to that process. Is there any update whatsoever you can give on the situation with Sports Direct?
I can't give a specific update in terms of the contractual issues because that's still subject to the confidentiality agreements, but I think we're probably closer than we have been to the possibility of having something in place in time for a kit launch for the new season. It's not done, but we are hoping to make progress in that direction. So as we're kind of sitting here today, we really are trying very, very hard to have something in place for the supporters in time to have a proper kit launch in time for the new season. And while it's far from being a certainty, I'm, let's say, cautiously optimistic that we might get to that point.
The interim results were also announced this week. How do you reflect on them?
The interim results were good. I think it was comforting, certainly from a shareholder's point of view as well, supporters to know that we've been able to make the investments we've done, even though some of the investments maybe haven't worked out. We've had the flexibility to at least invest in the club, and to do that and still make a small operating profit, I think is it's great credit to the supporters in terms of the season ticket sales. It's great credit to Scott and the commercial people in terms of getting the commercial side, the hospitality side right. And remember, these results have been achieved without what one would call a normalised retail operation because we still haven't had that sorted out. So again, it bodes well for the future if we can get the retail sorted out and then continue the investment, get into Europe. Then I think from a financial point of view, I think the club is in a very, very good position. And probably if the team is a little bit behind on the park from where I thought we'd be 2 years ago, I think from a financial stability point of view, the club is ahead of where I thought we'd be 2 years ago.
And making that operating profit, how significant is that for the club going forward?
Well, it's significant in the sense that all of the money ultimately goes back into the squad. So, for example, we had a situation, say with the manager, where we had to pay compensation. It was a fairly sizable amount of compensation, because we are running a kind of fairly financial responsible way, even with the obvious restrictions that we have on us, because we're not competing in Europe and we don't have that type of cash flow. We still had the flexibility to make such payments. And that wouldn't be possible without us at least having the company running in a reasonably sustainable basis, because you can't continue to rely on loans forever. That's not the answer going forward.